make sure that you have your questions ready to go. If you want to drop them into the chat window or raise your hand, we'll be happy to answer those as long as those, in the order that we receive them. So you can either ask them live or you can drop them in the chat window, I believe. And then we will get to those all in order. And why don't we just go ahead and start now? And as people join, they can start asking questions. But I want to thank, first of all, Chuck and Amanda for joining us here today on this webinar. My name is Christopher Moore. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of Quietlite. And for those of you who don't know, we did some of this went out to our list and some of this went out to pay-per-click audiences and stuff like that. So we've got some people joining us who don't know much about us. So just tell you a little bit about Quietlite and what we do. We were founded in 2006 and we help entrepreneurs build, buy, and sell their online businesses for 6, 7, or 8 figures. A big part of what we do is educational. We speak at conferences, we go on podcasts, we present webinars kind of like this. And we work with founders, entrepreneurs to help them build their businesses for a successful exit that's according to their own goals and plans. We are entirely entrepreneur-led and entrepreneur-focused. Everyone within the company has built, bought, or sold their own substantial online businesses. And the 2 people who are joining me today are no exceptions. They're 2 of our most senior, can I say senior without making you sound old? They're our most experienced, let's say, advisors. First is Chuck Mullins, joining us from Orlando. Chuck?
Yep.
Awesome. Chuck has always been a hustler. He started selling candy in school and started mowing lawns for probably nickels or quarters. He built his first profitable website at the age of 18 years old, studied software engineering. He's an expert in SEO and CRO. He's built, bought, and sold his own successful businesses, like I've said. And if you had a superpower, it'd be time travel. Actually, both of you said your superpower would be time travel, so that's kind of interesting. And also, so say hi, Chuck.
Hello.
Oh, very good. Thank you very much. And also joining us is Amanda Robb. She started her first online business in 2003 because it fit your schedule, right?
That's right.
The flexibility was what appealed to you. Amanda's found enormous success in the online space. She's been featured in Time Magazine and InStyle. She launched 5 websites in the publishing industry, turning them all into million-dollar businesses. She's, I think, the 2nd longest tenured Quietlite advisor. She doesn't look it. And she also would like to be able to turn back time as her superpower. So thank you both for joining us. I'm really excited to get this kicked off. For those of you who are on the call as attendees, please feel free to raise your hand, give us your questions, and we'll answer those. But I wanted to start off with just something really easy because we're talking today about increasing the value of your online business. And I think to be able to understand how to increase the value, guys, we want to know, how do you calculate the value of an online business to begin with? So let's start with that.
Well, I'll start with a simple form. I mean, in the most simplistic form of calculating the value of your business, it's a multiplier placed on the trailing 12 months SDE. And then obviously there's many factors that go into that multiplier and how it's weighted. But in the most simplistic form, you have a number, whether it be like a 2x, 3x, 4x, 5x, and it's placed on the trailing 12 months net profit, or SDE, seller's discretionary earnings. Chuck, do you want to add anything to that?
That's pretty much it, right? I guess the meat is in the details, right? So what is SDE and how do we increase that? And so, when a lot of people are getting ready to sell their business, they don't know all these things. And sometimes people will try and sell their business just for what the net income is, right? And they miss out on a lot of opportunity to add additional value. I give a presentation where we talk about, like, on a regular business, how you can add, hundreds of thousands of dollars to the bottom line just by using math and logic. So there's lots of little tweaks you can do that are legitimate, that add tons of value.
And I see a question, what's SDE? It's seller's discretionary earnings, and how that's calculated is your net profit plus add backs. So add backs may be meals and entertainment, travel, the owner's salary, airline miles, and things like that are earned, potentially insurance, owner insurance, and travel.
Yep,
Those are
and
just
things that are one-time business expenses. So
right.
say you you create a mold to produce a product and it's a one-time thing that you produce, you're not gonna have to produce it again. That can often be added back. Versus like if you're selling cell phone cases where you have to make the mold every year for every new cell phone, you wouldn't add back those costs. But if it was a one-time expense that's not recurring, you can add that back. Sometimes if you're doing like a site redesign and you spend, a bunch of money on redesigning a site, and it's not something you're doing every year or every 2 years or anything, you can add that back as well.
Great, good answer. So, Chuck and Amanda and I and a lot of the other advisors go to a lot of conferences, and we always, get the question right off the bat. Okay, it's a multiple of the seller's discretionary earnings. So, what multiples are people getting for their businesses right now? Can you give us a range? I know this is a tough one.
It's so varied.
Exactly.
It really depends on the specific business and the overall health of the business, also the motivations of the seller, whether or not, they want to get out quickly, or if they're willing to wait for the right buyer. But I mean, just as an example, I just sold an Amazon FBA business for less than 2x because the trends were not great. And I just put Amazon FBA business under offer for 3.5x plus earnout. So, it really can vary vastly based off of that specific business and the marketplace based off of today as well. And that's why I think it's so important to get a valuation done for your specific business. I don't think that, you can generalize too much in this space because it's just such a dynamic and evolving place.
Yeah. So I would add that, typically it's somewhere between, somewhere between a 2X and say a 5 or a 6X, and it ranges greatly. There's a number of factors that go in, like you said, right? And risk is one of the main factors. So having a well-aged business that's well diversified, not just in terms of like products, right? So diversified in products, diversified in sales channels, diversified in traffic sources. So the more diversity you can add, generally, the more value there's going to be, because it's the inverse of risk, right? The more risky a business is, the less likely I'm going to recoup my investment. So you have to think, right? If I'm paying 3 times multiple on a business, I need 3 years of that income just to break even, right? So if it's very risky, what's the likelihood that I'm going to recoup my investment plus make money? So opportunity, things of that nature as well.
And like recurring revenue is a big one. So businesses that have strong recurring revenue obviously plays into that. So there are numerous factors that can play into, what increases or decreases the overall value.
Yeah. Additionally, size is an important factor as well. So when you've got smaller businesses, say a business is making, $30,000 a year, and I said, hey, would you buy this $30,000 a year business for 15 grand? You're like, wow, like I'd make more money in 6 months than the business cost me. But if I tell you, well, but you have to put in 60 hours a week, right? Like I've just bought myself a really poor paying job, right? So you have to look at size. So if I'm buying a business that's $100,000 of profit and it only requires 20 hours a week, well, now I bought myself, a fairly good paying job, right? If the business is making $500,000 a year, now I'm making additional money that I can reinvest into the business. It's more of an investment as opposed to buying a job. So as you move up in the value of the business, the less it is that you're buying a job and the more it is that you're buying an investment. And there's there's different points at which the values start going up, right? So when you get up into a couple $100,000, you've got like a certain set of buyers who will come in. And then if the business is making, say, $1 million, all of a sudden the private equity start moving in, then you get to 2 million. And then it's the vast majority of private equities come in, and then 5 million, even more. And when I say the million, 2 million, 5 million, I'm talking about the profit of the business, right? The SDE.
Great. Had a really good question come in too about inventory if you're selling an e-commerce or FBA business, whether or not that's included in the valuation.
It's in addition to typically at landed cost. That's typically how we do the valuation. And so because that's a moving target based off of the time that you list versus the time that you sell, that inventory value could change dramatically based off of the seasonality of the business, So we always advise that it's an addition to the sale of the business.
Yeah, and that's the industry standard, is to be the price of the business plus inventory. Again, that can vary by the size of the business. Once you get up into a business that's 20 million, oftentimes inventory will be included. Sometimes cash flow or there's other things that'll be included, right? But on smaller businesses, it's almost always plus inventory. And you have to make sure that when you're looking at businesses, when you're talking about buying or selling, that you're comparing apples to apples, because there are some people who do it an unstandard way where they lump in the inventory, and that can throw off the numbers, right? And then you're not talking apples to apples.
Great. Go ahead, Amanda.
I see a question that just came up that says, I've talked to other brokers that use a prior calendar year instead of trailing 12-month earnings, which is correct. It's going to be the most recent trailing 12-month earnings that we place the multiplier on. So you use the history of, year over year and how, that trajectory of growth or decline is trending. But when you place a multiplier, you want it to be on your most recent month's history, the most recent 12 months of history.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that's important is because, everybody's always looking at trends of the business, right? Like, you want to buy a business that's growing. You don't want to buy a business that's declining. So just because they did a certain number last year, we're already almost 2/3 the way through this year. If you were looking at last year's numbers, like, did the business go up? Did COVID affect it positively, negatively? So you're always going to want to look at those trend lines relative on a year-over-year basis, right? Like, if last year was going like this and this year is going like that, that's not a positive thing, right? And that's also why history is very important. Like, you want to see multiple years of history, because people want to be able to compare January versus January versus January, February versus February versus February, because there's seasonality in businesses. So, obviously Christmas generally does well for people, and then January is usually a dip. And if you didn't have that year-over-year data and you saw December was high and then January was low, that might think, oh, wow, the business is tanking. Well, no, it always does this. Look, here's the 3 or 4 years of history that shows that every January it drops or every January it goes up, right? So it's very important to have that monthly data. So make sure if you're running an Amazon business that you're actually exporting that data. So I think Amazon only allows you to keep or look at the last 2 years. So you can use software like, I think, Seller Legend, and there's some other ones that will export that data so that you have the history for more than 2 years, because that's really important. Having 2 years of data is great, but people really want to see 3-4 years of data if they can, just so that they can really identify what the seasonality and the trends look like.
Absolutely. The seasonality is so important to be able to see, and you really can't see that in such a small snapshot.
Great.
And Chris, I see we've got questions coming in 2 different spots.
Yeah. So I'll moderate and whatever. For those of you who I noticed a couple more people have jumped on the call. If you want to raise your hand, you can do that to ask a question. You can type questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen there. You can put them into the chat window. We'll get to all these questions as best we can. So thanks all for your questions. Looking forward to answer a lot of these good ones coming in so far. So let's go to Kareem's question here. He says, what is the difference between a business that gets under offer within 3 to 7 days and one that's still showing as available in 6 months after appearing on the Quietlite marketplace? How could we prepare our brand to be able to get offers quickly?
I mean, I think the most important thing is the health of the business and then pricing it correctly. I mean, if the business is not priced correctly, it's going to sit on the marketplace. And on top of that, it has to be attractive. The overall, the attributes of the business have to appeal to a buyer for it to go under offer within 3 to 7 business days. And, some of those things would be, strong growth trajectory, ease of transition, strong earnings year over year with a long history of performance, and ease of management, potentially the owners not working in the business, but rather on the business, and there's a team in place. These all are factored into, how attractive the business is to many buyers. And typically, when a business goes under offer that quickly, there are multiple offers.
Yeah, and additionally, I would say there's certain elements that you can't control, right? So finance businesses, like if it's like a finance content site, those are always hot. Certain types of Amazon businesses are hot. Oftentimes, it's the perceived moat around the business. So like if it's an Amazon business, right? Are you selling a private label product where there's, 20 other people selling the exact same product, and it's more of a, like, you're just branding the business and there's not a strong moat around it? Or is it like a very unique product that there's a moat because nobody else is producing that product, or you have, high, star and review ratings on there. So you have to think about it from the buyer's perspective. And if I buy this business, am I going to be able to operate? Am I going to be able to grow it? Is there going to be competition that comes in and competes against me? Right. So I would say a lot of it is the niche that it's in. So how popular that is. Right. So there's going to be certain things that are just unattractive. And sometimes, like, unattractive, I don't mean like, how do I say it? So like there's things that people are excited about. Right. So I have one that I recently just got under contract. We had 5 offers, and it was a women's interest type website, right, in the finance space. So you like a double thing there. There was a lot of couples that were coming in. They wanted to buy because it's like a husband and a wife team, or 2 women who were interested in it, right? And it was an exciting niche because it was something that they'd be passionate about. Whereas like maybe somebody's not passionate about yarn or something. Like, I'm sure there are people passionate, right? But how big's the market around that niche? And just because something moves quickly off, and gets a lot of interest, doesn't necessarily mean it's a better business, right? Sometimes the boring things, right? If I'm selling like thread, maybe thread is just a nice, stable business that's not exciting, but it's going to be there for the long haul. The things that I have made mistakes on personally buying was like something that's super trendy. I bought like a diet business in the paleo space. And when I bought it, it was going up, 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 up. But the paleo fad died, which I didn't think it was a fad. Right? I thought like, no, this is the thing. For my wedding, when I bought the company, my due diligence was doing the diet before my wedding, right? I lost like 40 pounds on the paleo diet. It's like, this thing works, right? Like, this is here to stay, but it was a fad. And over time, if you look at like Google Trends, it dropped off, and I sold it. But it definitely dropped off. So sustainability, I think, is an important factor. But as far as like what sells quickly, like Amanda said, pricing, how desirable it is, the specific niche it's in, the trajectory of the business, business that stays on the marketplace for 6 months, there's probably something about it that may not be that attractive, and that it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad company, but it's just a matter of finding like the right buyer for that specific business. So.
Yes, and I guess my question then for you two is, who sets the price? If price is a real big, okay, so I mean, ultimately, if you present what the market says to the buyer, can they choose to go higher, go lower based on their goals, or can they limit for you what they're looking for in terms of like an all cash offer or a financed offer? I mean, what kind of options does a buyer have in terms of like what kind of listing they get and what kind of offers they're open to?
So like we said, the market is what determines the value of a business. Now, when somebody comes to us and says, hey, I don't care, I want to sell this thing for $1 million, and we say it's worth 500,000. Well, I want $1 million. Well, I'm sorry, that's an unrealistic expectation. We're not going to try and sell it for $1 million, right? Like, it just doesn't make sense. And we're not going to tell you, like, we're not going to lie to you and say, oh yeah, we can get you $1 million, because we're not hard up for listings, right? We are able to sell the businesses we have because of the way we do things. So I would be careful about hearing what you want to hear as opposed to what the reality of the situation is. If you say, Chuck, I don't care if it takes 3 months to sell, I want to try to maximize the amount I get. Okay, we can push that multiple a little bit and really try to like stretch it. But stretch doesn't mean go from 500 to $1 million, right? Stretch is, 10, 20, 30%, maybe, as far as the asking price. But if you say, like, Chuck, I want to sell this in a week, well, then maybe I say, hey, it's worth 500. If you want to sell it in a week and it's not in a super attractive niche where we know it's going to move quick, maybe we got to think about like offering it slightly less or offering more favorable terms, right? So say that you're willing to hold a note or do this or that. Additionally, going back, like, as far as what makes an attractive business, oftentimes it's SBA eligibility, right? So making sure that business is SBA eligible, and sometimes you can if you're not a US based company, but other times you can. So.
And I think to add to that, like Chuck mentioned, if somebody is wanting to get $1 million, but their business right now is only worth 500,000, but the growth trajectory is super strong, there is something to be said about growing into the asking price and the overall multiple and value. And so if that growth trajectory looks like it will be hit within a few months, then it makes sense, because you can kind of show those projections. And if you're hitting those targets, then absolutely. If you don't hit those targets, then that can work against you. That's a huge spread, but there are examples of where that would make sense in a smaller spread. But if it is that huge of a spread, then it may make sense to wait 6 months to 12 months to list your business to actually reach those goals.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the things that we advise people on, right? If your goal is to exit with $1 million, we'll often get on a phone call with you, talk to you, say it's worth this. Here's some steps you can take in order to grow the business to get it to that level. Like Amanda said, though, also sometimes we can list it at that more aggressive price if you're going to grow to that within a couple months. We just did that on a business that's under contract right now, where I think when we launched it, the SDE was like around 600, but we knew each month for the next 4 months, it was going to add $100,000. So it was going to be at 600,000, but we knew it was going to get to $1 million within 4 months as far as the SDE goes. So we were super aggressive on the multiple, right? We came out at somewhere around like a 6X, but each month that went by, it was like went from 6 to 5 to 4. And we were able to show that as far as like by proving it out, right? Like a month went by and the SDE grew into that. So it was a matter of telling or showing the buyers, like, here's what's going to happen. Do you want to buy it now and actually capture that value as it's going up? Or do you want to wait a couple months and let it prove out and then buy it? Because either way, it's going to be the same number. And
the important thing to note from what Chuck just said is that buyers really do like to see those numbers in the past in the rearview mirror per se. And so a lot of times those businesses don't get those multiples until they actually have kind of grown more into them. And so, if you don't hit those numbers, then it can be a really slippery slope. So it's really important that the business does hit those targets. And then once the buyers see that it's actually doing that, then they're more inclined to move forward.
Great. Yeah. And that comes back into like the whole, like, do I base it on the annual or base it on the trailing 12 months? When you have a business that's growing straight up, super strong growth, like, that's not the time to sell a business, right? Like, we can certainly sell it and that's great, but you want to sell a business when it's got moderate growth, not like hockey stick growth. Because like, if my business is making 100 grand right now for every month, or I should say, and there's something that's happening where it's growing, where this month I made 100, next month I made 110, the next month I make 120. Each of those months that goes by, that's $10,000 in additional, right? And then that's $20,000 times the multiple. So if it's a 4X multiple and it's 10 grand, well, then that's $40,000 in value for that month that I waited. And then the next month, since it went up by another 20 versus the 100 from the previous year, that's $80,000 in value, right? So it's one of these things where you have to time it, and it's hard to time, but you don't want to sell when it's going straight up. You don't want to sell when it's going down. And if it is going down and you're not going to right the ship, then you want to sell super fast. But you tend to want to sell when you've got like some moderate growth.
Great. Terrific, guys. Keep those great questions coming, everybody. We've got a couple on deck, but if you want to continue to raise your hand, put questions to the chat window, or put questions into the Q&A, we'll be happy to answer those. The next question comes from Dave. He says, I received an LOI that includes an unsecured promissory note due in 2 years. Can you discuss this type of note?
So I would say it depends on what you mean by unsecured. So are you saying there's not a personal guarantee, or there's not, like, it's not collateralized by the business? Like, I'd say there's different types of notes, right? Like, ultimately, if you need some sort of collateral, meaning like you should be able to take the business back, but then you have to decide if there's a note and it's unsecured, meaning I'm just getting the business back, like, are they going to be able to just tank the business?
It can vary.
Yeah, I'd say that's a scary one. And is there a reason that they don't want to securitize the note? Probably need a little more detail on that one.
And Dave, feel free, if you want to, just type that into the chat window. If you want have more specifics on that, we'll come back to you. Next question is, what are the main reasons deals fail after letter of intent?
One of the main reasons is financial due diligence shows discrepancies in the numbers. So things come up during due diligence that where, the financials might not actually align with what was portrayed in the package. And that can happen for various reasons. Perhaps, if there wasn't a professional doing the bookkeeping, also accrual versus cash-based accounting can come into play, on the financial side, but also there's other things that can come in. Life happens, right? A seller may decide that their business is doing so well that they don't want to sell anymore. And same with buyers. Life changes. Every day is a new day. So, it's really hard to pinpoint what might come up and break a deal. But certainly, like for example, in SBA, if a business doesn't appraise and a new structure can't be put into play that works for both parties, then potentially that deal would break. And that has happened, especially very recently. So, there's definitely different things that can come into play that can break a deal.
I would say though that for me on most of my deals, it's very rare that happens. Most deals that go under contract do close. I'm not sure if it's the same for you, Amanda.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
yep,
and then,
absolutely.
Yeah, and so some of the things I would say that tend to make deals not close are unexpected things that come up. So ugly things. So I always tell like my clients, like, get ugly early, right? Like, don't try to hide stuff. If there's a negative thing, they're probably going to figure it out. And it's best to like put it like in the client interview where it's very upfront. And that way, when like somebody's reading the client interview, okay, yep. Oh, I don't like that, but okay, check, right? Like they checked it off in their mind. Like, okay, I understand. It's not something I like, but I've seen it, right? If you don't talk about that early on, and now they're in LOI and they're doing their due diligence, it's no longer a check, right? Now it's a red flag, a big, X. So it's all about like getting in front of the issue as opposed to having it happen during due diligence, right? Because when they're in due diligence, they've already made their offer based on the information they have. They find a big red flag, a check, a big red X. The price is probably going to end up changing, right? Because it's like, well, you didn't tell me about that. My offer was based on the information I had, which was not including that. So definitely want to get ahead of it early on.
Absolutely. And there's always going to be hurdles. I mean, there's very few deals that do not have hurdles, especially when you're talking about, larger deals. And it's just being able to, like Chuck said, properly get ahead of those and have a solution for the buyer and how to work around it.
Yeah. And something else I would say is selling your business, whether you're selling or buying, is a very emotional thing. And people don't necessarily always put stock in that and realize that it's going to be an emotional process. So like something you want to do is make sure whether you're buying or selling is just be nice, right? Like don't come at it as like an adversarial type thing. Like try to find common ground if an issue does come up. One of the things I always say is like, we should really be taking like psychology classes because we're almost like counselors. Like every day I'm having to like walk people back off of cliffs. Like, no, like it's okay. Like they didn't mean it that way. Like I know how they said it sounded like that. It's not really what they meant. So like being civil and being friendly will go a long way with these transactions. And as far as I always talk to like buyers, like I've got certain buyers that'll buy a lot of businesses and they tend to actually be able to buy them cheaper because they're nice on the phone calls and they ask like good questions and they show interest and they compliment the seller, right? So be nice. And it goes the same for the seller, right? Mm-hmm. Being nice, showing that you care about the business. That's important to buyers. Buyers, when they say, why are you selling the business? That is a really important question. And if you don't give a good answer for that, they're going to think you're lying. And the answer doesn't have to be like some amazing thing, right? Like, I'm tired. I've been working on this forever. Like, I just want to move on. But like, they have to believe you, right? So it's important.
Absolutely. The psychology component cannot be underplayed. Absolutely. Such a big portion of bridging that gap between a buyer and seller.
Great, wonderful questions, great answers, everybody. Keep those questions coming. We've got some still coming in a little bit, so we've got plenty of time, so keep popping those into the Q&A, into the chat. We'll be happy to answer those. Thanks again for all of the really good questions. Dave did type in a little bit of a clarification, which is not not really a clarification. He says the LOI didn't give any additional specifics on the note. They didn't say how it would be backed. So that's probably something to stay away from.
Well, and one of the things I would say is the LOI is probably the stage to like set your expectations, you know, like at a high level, right? So when you get to the asset purchase agreement, that's where like it's the legal language. But the most important thing you can do at an LOI stage is to set expectations and understand what they mean. So ask questions, right? If it's an unsecured note, what are the details of that unsecured note? What is that going to look like, right? Having to wait 2 years for guaranteed money, it depends on how desperate, not a good word, right? But how motivated you are to sell. So it really just depends.
And also it depends on, you know, how you have the business overall. Are you escrowing the domain during that period? If it's an Amazon FBA business, potentially can't do that. So, you know, what other aspects can you put into play to guarantee that payment?
Yeah. And then like with an FBA business, right, there are things they could do to tank that business. They could do a bunch of, you know, like buying a bunch of reviews and doing all these things, right? So know who the buyer is, like try to figure out if they've got any history and have they bought a business before? Can I speak to the seller, you know, to the old seller, the person you've bought a previous business from, to understand like what you did with their business. So it's important that you research the person who's buying it if you're having to hold a note.
Great. Excellent. Keep those questions coming. Another one here. What percentage of deals are 100% cash? Is it actually possible to get a 100% cash offer? And he says, thank you for answering the questions as well. Well, thank you for it.
So
definitely possible for sure.
It happens all the time.
Yes, absolutely. So, you know, we have many deals that are 100% cash. But I would say the size plays into that very much. You know, a deal size under $500,000, you know, that percentage is going to be much higher. Now, deal sizes over $500,000, that percentage is going to go down significantly because buyers are going to want some skin in the game from a seller, that they're not just going to drop and run. And that could be in a holdback, seller financing, an earnout. There's different structures that can be put into play, and the percentages of cash down versus seller financing, earnout, and holdback will vary based off of the buyer and then also potentially a price point as well.
Yeah, I would say a lot of it comes into certainty of close. So if we've got an SBA offer or an SBA eligible business for sale, and you've got two offers, you know, a cash offer is almost always going to win out if it's equivalent to the SBA offer. So, you know, cash is king, right? Same thing when like you're buying a house. If you come in with cash, how certain am I that this is going to close, right? Because an SBA deal can take, you know, 3 months to close or 2 to 3 months, right? So certainty to close is an important thing. And then, like she said, right, like when you say 100% cash, is it 100% cash at close? Is it 80% cash at close with an earnout? So they do a lot. There are businesses that sell 100% cash up front, done. Depends on the desirability of the business, the competitiveness. If there's a single offer, then there's not really a compelling reason necessarily for somebody to pay 100% cash at close. But if there's 5 offers, 10 offers, 13 offers, like, you know, it can make all the difference to be a cash offer versus SBA or a seller note or something like that.
Yeah, the competitive nature it definitely plays into that. For example, I had a deal in the past year that was a multi-million-dollar business, but it had 13 offers on it. And the offer that won was the deal that came in full cash at close. And had we not have so many offers, I don't think that would have, you know, been an option for the seller, but that was, you know, the last offer that came in that, you know, had to win the seller over. So
Amanda, hearing you say that you had 13 offers just crushed me, because I had a business go under contract a couple of weeks ago. They got 13 offers, and I was like, oh, I'm the new king at Quietlite. I got 13 offers. I thought that was a high, but apparently you did it first. So
but a tie is great. A tie is fantastic. You both can wear that crown. Well, I mean, so you got a listing that had 13 offers recently. Man, has the market impacted the number of buyers there are for these businesses? It's
actually a really hot market right now. There's a lot of interest in buying. summers I think are traditionally slower, but this summer nobody went on vacation, right? So like they're all just putting their time into like trying to grow their businesses, and often people grow their businesses by acquiring other businesses. Some people are just looking to move out of the corporate job, right? Like what is business going to look like with COVID if this doesn't go away? So being able to work from home on an online business is very attractive. So a lot of people that are looking to buy online businesses right now.
I think money flow into the internet space has definitely shifted over the last 12 months, especially in the last 6 months, you know, as we've seen a change in habits, and shopping habits, right? So, you know, people are really noticing, hey, you know, there's a massive change here. This is not a short-term trend, trend. You know, this is something that will stick around for the long haul because people's shopping habits are changing. And so I think more people are actually willing to invest into this space now. That's definitely coming into play as well.
Awesome. Excellent. Keep those questions coming, guys. Here's another one. Are there certain kinds of businesses that get higher valuations than others? For example, like on Amazon businesses versus off Amazon e-commerce versus content sites. I mean, what are getting to the higher valuations and multiples?
Yeah. So I said it earlier, but businesses that get higher valuations are generally less risky, right? Value is the inverse of risk. So what makes something less risky? Diversity, certainty of income. So when you look at like generally the highest multiples are on like SaaS businesses. And why are they on SaaS business, software as a service or membership type businesses? It's because of the predictability of the revenue and of the profit, right? Like if I've got you on a recurring membership where you're paying me $20 a month every month, and I've been doing this for a number of years, I know that I've got, 10,000 people that are paying $20 a month, and my average churn rate is 1%. So every month, this number of people fall off, and let's say all my traffic comes in through Google, right? So it's all organic traffic, and Google makes some sort of a change. Well, if I've got an e-commerce business, Shopify, and 100% of my traffic on my Shopify site is organic Google traffic, I have my sales, and then tomorrow Google makes a change, zero, right? Like I go from having sales to no sales. And you've got that recurring revenue in there. Google shuts off all your traffic. Well, guess what? You've got a runway where, every month you're losing customers, but you've got time and revenue coming in to where you can correct and fix the problem, as opposed to tomorrow it goes to zero. So the value and the multiples are generally about the inverse of risk, and then also about the market, right? So right now with FBA businesses, you've got a lot of competition for those because you've got some companies that just raised like $260 or $290 million to buy FBA businesses, right? So that's going to put upward pressure on the FBA businesses. You've got all these other people who are reading those press releases, and now they're raising funds. So every week I'm having calls with potential acquirers who are like, oh yeah, I just raised 20 million. We're going to go out and buy FBA businesses. So that market pressure, I think, is going to put additional pressure on the FBA businesses to get it up. Where FBA, I think, used to be a lower multiple than like a Shopify business, but now I think it's actually going to end up getting pushed up above a Shopify. However, if you Shopify and Amazon, well, now there's diversity there, right? So less risk, higher multiple.
Definitely. I think, when it comes to different business models, I think, Chuck hit the nail on the head there. But also, it depends on the overall, this space evolves so quickly. So an Amazon FBA business 2 years ago was not generating as much interest as it is today. So as Chuck said, like just the buyer marketplace drives those multiples, and it can change so quickly. In the last, 6 to 12 months, we've seen multiples really advance in some of these niches. Yeah.
And then one of the other things I would say is like multiples are also on the defensibility of the business. So again, it's a risk thing, right? So is it a unique product where nobody else is making this and you own the market, and it would be difficult for somebody else to come in and sell it, versus, am I selling just a commodity-based product where it's a race to the bottom on pricing? Like that's a lot less desirable because of the risk, right? So people want to buy unique businesses that would be hard to for somebody else to start, right? You often have to think, like one of our colleagues, Walker Dybel, wrote the book Buy Then Build, right? You always have to think about when people are buying a business, they're thinking, okay, I can spend $1 million in buying this, but if it only cost me $100,000 to create it from scratch, right? Like, why would I spend $1 million? Like, if they're 6 months ahead of me, and I put $100,000, I get to where they are. Does that make sense to do that? Or if Walker's book is more, I guess, about buying it and then doing that, right? So then building it from there and then selling it at an eventual higher exit.
Wonderful. Terrific. All right, people, keep your questions coming. We got about another 15 minutes yet to go, so we still have time for a few more questions. Another one here about European-based FBA businesses. Could they suffer in terms of multiple of SDE? He says he has a presence in the USA, but it's a small percentage. Most of the business is happening in France, Germany, and the UK. Is there going to be adverse effects on the valuation for that?
It can definitely have adverse effects in the sense that it's not going to be SBA qualified, and so that your buyer pool is going to be smaller. Certainly, you only need one right buyer for that business, and so you can get a pretty strong multiple. But overall, your buyer pool is going to be smaller, and when the marketplace drives the multiple, that definitely comes into play. So if you have less activity on a business and you're just working with one buyer, then they have more control over, the end result and where the valuation comes in. So what we're seeing right now, though, is there is more interest that's showing up for, Amazon EU and other marketplaces. But that's still tough because we just don't have that vast buyer pool with the SBA pre-qualified buyers.
Yeah, and so like while there are less buyers for like European companies, there are also less sellers, right? So when you do have a buyer who's from there is looking for something that's local to them, then it's more attractive to them. Where you really start to see like the multiples dropping on businesses is when they're like outside of kind of the core European Union, right? So I don't want to mention any specific company or countries because I don't want to insult anybody, right? But there are certain countries where buyers have perceived risk as far as fraud or black hat techniques. And those countries that are kind of outside the core EU are going to see significantly lower multiples because of that perception of risk.
Also, the transferability of those accounts comes into play as well. I know that's evolving, and we are seeing some change there, but like Amazon EU is more complicated to transfer, and there are some technical components that have to come into play to properly transfer those, and it can take some time.
Terrific. All right. We're about 13 minutes left in our hour together, so keep those questions coming. We have time for a few more. I wanted to dive in with a question that I always find is, and you've touched around this quite a bit, but I think one thing would be good to know is like, what are some of the top mistakes entrepreneurs make when growing their business and preparing it for sale? Like, what do they need to avoid?
I think, this is a really tough thing for business owners and potential sellers, is working in the business versus on the business. And of course, at first, when you're building a business, you're in it, right? You're growing it, you're wearing all the hats of the business. And it's really difficult to do everything really well. And so finding that balance between, transitioning from being in the business to working on the business and delegating different parts of the business to people who really specialize in PPC management and marketing and organic traffic rankings, depending on your model. And, having systems in place to help you manage the business and scaling. I think a lot of owners fall short in having systems in place to properly manage that scaling, and they don't even know how much they're reinvesting back into the business or if they're profitable. So, having the proper books in place it is also an important component, so that you know how much you're spending on the business as well.
Yeah, we've got a great article called something like the 4 pillars of value that I recommend everybody take a look at. Um, Value really comes down to risk, um, growth opportunities, transferability, and documentation or verifiability. So all of those are very important. So when you're growing the business, making sure that you have super clean books. Like I'm sure most of us watch like Shark Tank, and what do they hate? They hate when somebody gets on there and they say, okay, what's your customer acquisition cost? And they're like, I don't know. Or, these sort of like financial related questions, right? Like know your books, make sure they're clean. One of the reasons that some of the, like when companies start getting larger and larger, that the values get pushed up are for cleaner books, right? Like having more professional documentation that's verifiable so they can do projections and things of that nature. So clean books is super important. If you're selling a physical product, making sure that you're on accrual basis versus cash. I don't know if everybody knows what the difference is, but like if you started the year and you had $100,000 in income or $100,000 in inventory and you ended the year with $150,000 in inventory, that means you spent 50 grand of inventory. That if you're on cash-based accounting, that's 50 grand inventory that's on your P&L that shows it as an expense. It's not really an expense, right? Because you didn't make a profit from selling those products. So it lowers your SDE by 50 grand, which is then has a multiplier. So maybe you just undervalued your company by 150 grand. Whereas on accrual-based accounting, you're accounting for the inventory at the time you sell it. So if I sell something for $20 and it costs me $5, right? I account for that $5. So for every item I sell, I account for it. Whereas again, when you buy the inventory and you're on cash-based accounting, if I just spent 50 grand in buying inventory in January, 50 grand goes on the P&L, it makes it look like that month I lost $40,000, right? Or whatever the number is. And the next month, it makes it look like I actually got all this additional profit because I didn't account for my cost of goods sold. So accrual-based accounting has a significant impact on just the removing of the additional inventory off of the P&L and smoothing out your P&L to show like what's truly going on. And operationally, when you do it, now you can see like, am I actually making a profit? Because I talk to people all the time, like, yeah, I made all this money. And then we look at their books and it's like, no, you really didn't make all this money. Like, I know you thought you did, but you started the year with 300,000 inventory. You ended with 50,000 inventory. So you had 250,000 inventory you didn't account for, which is an expense that you didn't account for in your P&L. So it made you look like you made 250,000. Now, like that may sound good when you're trying to sell your business, but no buyer is going to fall for that, right? Like they know what they're looking at and they know that they need to account for the cost of goods. So hugely important. A lot of value can be gotten from that.
Awesome. Wonderful. Okay.
I see, before we move on, I see Alan had asked a question a long time ago about you ever apply the multiplier sooner than the trailing 12 months, say trailing 6 months to extrapolate. So I can answer it, or you want to answer that?
Go ahead, Chuck.
So yes and no, right? Like the multiple is we determine the multiple based on growth, right? So if you have growth that's occurring, we're going to put a higher multiple, right? So while we're not necessarily looking at just a multiple times the trailing 3 months, we are taking account the multiple or the what the growth of the business looks like when we're increasing or decreasing the multiple. Would you agree with that?
You have to, absolutely. You have to also take into account like the seasonality of the business. So, if your sales drop off for the summer months and then, your Q4 is the meat of your profitability, you would be really, it would not be fair to a buyer to just take in a 6-month snapshot and then extrapolate on that. So, and obviously this is going to change from business to business, but, we have to take everything into account. And typically you need that entire history to really show a full picture of what the business is doing.
Yeah. I would say the time that most business, like the most people would look at, like say a trailing 6 or 3 months would be like on a SaaS business where, it's like there's growth and it's sustained growth, right? There's not that seasonality to it. That's when you would kind of look at that, but still we're going to base the multiple on the trailing 12 months, but we take into account like where it's at for like the trailing 3 or 6 months. Additionally, when you're looking at that, you have to look at, is it annual recurring or is it monthly recurring? How do those things affect? Did you do something like have like a one-off sale where it's like, oh, buy a lifetime membership for 90% off, right? Like if you do that, you just destroyed value in the business because like, yeah, you boosted up your last month's revenue, but like, how did you do that, right? You did that by extracting maximum amount of that buildup value in the company. And like the person who buys it, since you just gave them a lifetime license, like they've just lost all of that potential value from that customer base moving forward. So you literally just destroyed value in the business by doing something like that.
Terrific. Wonderful. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left. I wanted to ask you guys a question selfishly. What makes Quietlight different from other brokerages?
I think experience. Each one of us has had our own businesses in this space. Many of us have bought and sold, so we've been on both the seller side and the buyer side, which I think is super important. As Chuck mentioned earlier, psychology comes into play, and it's getting an offer is one thing, but getting these deals to close is a whole different animal. And being able to bridge that gap and manage emotions and really relate with the buyer and the seller and going through the process is extremely valuable because that's what's going to get these deals done and closed. And then just being able to understand the evolution of this marketplace and how dynamic it is, and putting that into play and actually being able to walk a seller from 3 months before selling through that process and planning is very critical to getting them a max value and having that experience in doing so.
Yeah, the average Quietlite advisor has, I think it's 17 years of experience in the online business, world. So like when people ask me like, oh, do you know about this? Like chances are I do. I've been there and I've done that. I've bought and sold so many businesses that like I can see it from both sides, right? Like I understand what the buyer's going through. I understand what the seller's going through. I know what needs to happen in order for them to connect. Sometimes we'll get people that come in, right? And they want to put an LOI on a business on day one. And like, we know enough to know that doing that isn't necessarily going to actually make the transaction occur, right? Like when somebody comes in and is willing to put an LOI in without even having had a chance to really review the business, what are the chances they're actually going to close on the business, right? Like they need to have actually reviewed the materials and understand it, because what they're trying to do is lock it up so that they can then go and figure out whether they want to buy it or not, right? Like we want them to know if they're going to buy it before they go under LOI, not after. So it's a hugely important thing. And that's why so many of our businesses actually close once they go to LOI, because we vet the buyers and make sure that they're serious when they go under contract, that they're going to follow through and close on the business, because that can actually hurt a business, right? Like if you go under LOI and then it comes out and it didn't close, everybody's like, well, what happened? Like, was there a problem? Like, what did they find in due diligence that made them not buy the company? So
you lose a lot of momentum.
Yeah. We certainly want that certainty to close.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Anything to add, Amanda?
No, I think we've covered.
Terrific. Okay, so with just a couple minutes left. I'd like a 30-second from each of you on what's the one thing someone can do today to secure their valuation, to increase their valuation. What's like one actionable thing that anybody can really do in their business that most people aren't doing, that someone could turn off this webinar and go do right now?
I don't know if this answers your question directly, but I think that business owners lose sight of, they get so into the minutia of the business and what's going to add value. What can we be doing here, there, everywhere, and they get so overwhelmed by that. But at the end of the day, it's your bottom line that's going to increase your value, and increasing your net profit or SDE is going to increase your value of your business. And so yes, there's a lot of different things you can be working on. But at the end of the day, it comes down to, recurring revenue, potentially value of, your growth, and just maintaining a business that has strong trajectory, whether that be, consistent sales or growing sales, and not to lose sight of that.
Terrific. Chuck?
I don't know that I got one, but I'll run through a couple real quick.
You have 30 seconds. You can run through as many as you want in 30 seconds.
Talking. Let me talk then. So again, if you have a business that's inventory, accrual accounting, super important, right? Add a ton of value. If you don't have a physical product business and it's content or something, right? Doing whatever you can to remove yourself from the business. Again, would you, if you're buying the company, would you rather buy a company where the guy's putting in 60 hours or the lady's putting in 60 hours, or one where they're putting in 5 or 10 and maybe only looking at it from a high level, right? You're much more likely to want to buy that business where it's kind of a hands-off operations. And if you want to get dirty, you could, and maybe there's some value you can get from like removing a manager and actually working the business. And then additionally, creating standard operating procedures, right? What's the transferability of the business? So that comes into play with removing yourself, right? Creating, systematizing things about the business so that it's easy to transfer. Somebody who wants to buy a business wants to be able to hit the ground running on day one. So making sure that those things are there so that they can take over is really important.
All right. Great questions, everybody. Great answers. Chuck and Amanda, why don't you tell us how people can get in touch with you if they want more information and have further questions?
You can reach me via email, amanda@quietlightbrokerage.com. That's the easiest way.
And Chuck at quietlightbrokerage.com. We're pretty much all just first name at Quietlite Brokerage with the exception of a few. So
mine unofficial email address is actually badass@quietlightbrokerage.com. So I'm very proud of that one. Everyone, thank you so much for all your really great questions. Chuck and Amanda, thanks for being patient with my hosting, for having some really great answers. We will be doing these AMAs monthly, so we'll be posting this to our YouTube channel as well. So we hope that you continue to join us, ask good questions, and reach out to us anytime that you have questions about your particular online business or to get a valuation individually tailored to your business and your needs. So thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you next month. Have a great day.